Welcome to Two Homes. This podcast explores the relationship between our inner world and the systems we live within, from our bodies and beliefs to the businesses, destinations, and environments we shape. Because sustainability that isn't embodied doesn't last, and well-being that stays at the surface level doesn't change much at all. Together, we'll explore what it really takes to build systems that support people, places, and the planet over the long term. From leadership and organisational culture to the hidden patterns that shape how we live, work, and travel. This is an invitation to look a little deeper and to discover how meaningful change often starts closer to home than we think. In today's episode of Two Homes, we are looking at why you can't build sustainable systems from survival mode. We live in a world where fast turnaround, quick metrics, targets, busyness, fabricated urgency is the norm. We have political cycles that rely on short-term wins to get the voters. We have business goals that are set on year perpetual growth. And this creates a lot of urgency that's not really urgent, a lot of busyness that's not really necessary. And something we rarely measure is a really powerful aspect that would deliver all of those outcomes and more. And that's our nervous system regulation. And this is not a luxury, yet it is treated like a luxury. People are told that they're selfish if they're focusing on themselves. And then we believe it. So what we're talking about here is that how can we extend what's currently measured, revenue, growth, room nights, visitor nights, etc., the typical metrics of the tourism and hotel industries, and shift to something that's less short-term and more long-term, less about reaction and more about design. What if leadership capacity, the ability to stay steady under pressure, was treated as a strategic asset rather than a nice to have? I touched on this in the first episode, but nervous system regulation isn't a common topic in sustainability. So let's have a closer look at what that means, what I'm talking about, and why it's so important now, especially. Even from when I prepared this episode to recording, it seems like this is so needed. I'm seeing peers, friends, colleagues, industry leaders crumbling with the pressure of things that are beyond our control, feeling the stress of things that are not belonging to us. And so it's part of all of us. It drives our behavior, whether we're conscious of it or not. And I've brought so many lessons from understanding this better into how I work. It's so powerful to understand these dynamics at play. We can begin to take things less personally, to look at new ways of doing things. I am a lifelong learner. I'm really embrace my beginner's mindset, and that is what has led me down this path. And this is why my perspectives on how the nervous systems play out in work are what we'll be exploring today. There are so many layers to this. It is complex, and I'm going to say it. I know we don't love complexity. We're really, driven for simplicity, and this is part of what limits us. There are so many solutions that are put out into the world that are, quick fix, like you can lose weight in 30 days or change your mindset in 30 days or quicker. And the truth is, without the deeper work, a lot of that stuff is surface level and not lasting and not impactful. I've thought about this many times, like different courses I've done where I've thought, oh, I need to understand more about climate science. I need to understand more about running a business, these kind of things. And the promises are, oh, yeah, in just 6 weeks, we'll deliver you this. And honestly, they fall quite flat because they're not taking into account so much of the conditioning that we have from our families, from our cultures, from our workplaces. These situations, our life circumstances, they shape how we respond to the energy around us. You know, if you've ever felt like you just click with someone, or maybe the opposite, you get that feeling of discomfort with someone, this isn't necessarily about that person, but it might be something deeper within you that recognizes that energy or recognizes something from before, from earlier in your life. And yet we make these decisions. You've probably heard remember this one from quite a long time ago, that, you know, that when you're going for a job interview or you're going for a meeting, someone makes their decision about you in the first 30 seconds. And I think that's even been reduced to quicker than that. And it's because of how we feel. It's that underlying energy. If someone feels nervous, you will feel their nervousness. If someone feels confident, you will feel their confidence. So this is your nervous system communicating with you. It's based on your past experiences, and it's based on what behavior you exhibited in order to survive. I was actually listening to a podcast on my way into the studio today with Gabor Mate, and he was talking exactly about this. It helped you survive. And so what helped us then might not help us now. And what keeps us stuck or stressed may not help us build long-term systems. And long-term systems are what the world needs in order to build a safer place, in order to unwind from the spiral that it seems to currently be in. To create better systems for people and the planet, we need to take a pause and recognize that what got us here is not what's going to get us out of here. So when your nervous system has tracked something as a win in similar situations, it's going to keep repeating that behavior because that signals safety. The pause can be really important because what's instinctive is not necessarily what is needed in a particular situation. I'm currently reading a book by environmentalist Tammy Matson called Elephant Dance, and she talks about being in a tent in the wilderness in Africa, and during the night 2 elephants come up and start to rub against the tree right next to her tent. Now her instinct is to run, but her logic tells her that running is the thing that will actually get her killed. So this is a really profound example of where the instinct, the survival mode for flight is so strong and yet not necessarily in her best interest. It's this interesting balance of understanding our instincts and then tuning into whether our instincts are actually working in our best interests or not. And this is the work of starting to understand, how do we regulate? How do we stop from reacting, closing our eyes, to a more regulated state where we can make decisions for the longer term? Understanding the patterns can help us change the operating systems within ourselves and within the businesses that we're working in and the societies that we're living in. It also gives us the opportunity to have more compassion for other people. And this is awareness, and this is so important. And I've touched on this before. Awareness is the beginning of behavior change, really. So let's look at a practical example. You know, you've come here. I work in sustainability. I work in tourism. So let's have a look at what that might play out like in the real world. I speak with a lot of leaders and sustainability managers who complain that people put things in the wrong bin. And the instinct here is to double down. It's to tell them over and over, this one goes here, this one goes there, or maybe yell at them in frustration, or maybe show them and really, double down on the telling. This is something that I came across like very early on in the days of PFC, and it seems to be quite a common thing. And unfortunately, the effect is limited because it's not incorporating a few things. And I'm not blaming these people, like this is certainly where I started on the journey as well. It's not that people want to get it wrong either. So let's look at that. Waxing lyrical a little bit here. If you grew up in a household, talking about that nervous system regulation, if you grew up in a household where you were nagged to clean your room, to pick up your shoes, whatever that might be, do the dishes, mow the lawn, blah, blah, blah. Perhaps being told to put your rubbish in the right bin or to take your Tupperware home or whatever it might be, that might feel a bit like it did when you were a kid. Or maybe you're a good kid and you did all of these things. You did everything you were told, but it was still never enough. Somehow you'd always missed something, or it wasn't good enough. How might you feel then? You're like, oh, I really tried to put the rubbish in the right bin, but as usual, it's not good enough. You might keep this internally, or you might give up on trying because you'd never get it right anyway. And there are also many other interpretations. I'm not a psychologist here, but I can relate to some of these things. My instinct has always been to double down and try harder. That's that perfectionist tendency. I've unraveled that a lot, but I know that there'd be plenty of you out there that can resonate with perfectionism. And then maybe you resonate with oh, well, what's the use in trying kind of approach, because you're never going to get it anyway. And so these are the kind of underlying things that, whether we're aware of it or not, are most likely playing out in the workplace. So what I've learned with working with hundreds of businesses is that telling people what to do has a limited effect. Leaders also don't seem to understand why they don't remember, because they're coming from it from the other perspective. So no one is at fault, but this is the pattern. This is the nervous system conditioning and the underlying behavior of what's playing out when we're trying to implement sustainability initiatives in the workplace. Once we become aware of the pattern, we can start to show up differently and achieve better outcomes. And I'm learning on the way as well. I saw a post in one of the Facebook groups that I moderate that asked the question, what do we do about the people that litter? And it's really easy to go into that same pattern here, to judge and be like, I would never do that. No, you would never do that. But first and foremost, if we're in that position, if we're asking that question, what do we do with people who litter? My now response to that is, we need to forgive them. They are working with their unconscious behavioral patterns. They may be doing their best. It may have been accidental. It may be cultural. There are so many things we don't know for sure what the truth is. But the assumption is often that they're doing it because they don't care. And it couldn't be further from the truth most of the time. So my response was, we forgive them and we can invite them to join something different. So in this case, it was a group running cleanup events, and I invite them to your next cleanup event. Hey, we're holding an event. Would you like to join in? Create some curiosity, come from a place of compassion. And I think this is all we can do. We can't force people to change. And from the very early days of PFC, I would always walk into a room and think, if I connect with one person, then my work here is done. If I provide something valuable for one person, that's enough. That's enough. So when we become aware of this, if we start to look beneath the surface, beyond our reactions and into what might be a better conversation, we can start to create better outcomes on both sides. One side may feel less judged. The other side may feel less judging. These are two sides of the same coin. If we want to create better systems and better outcomes, then we can't fight against each other. And that's what it sometimes feels like, fighting against each other. So that's one aspect And another layer that we operate from, and this is where we start to get into another degree of complexity. Another aspect is our reticular activating system. So it's our nervous system, we have a reticular activating system. Our brain is constantly filtering for threats, filtering for more of what we want to see, filtering to retain just what's most important, because we're hit with so much information all day long. Thousands and thousands of bits of information, decisions we need to make, things we need to focus on, stuff we think we need to get done. And so our reticular activating system is protecting us. And that's why you might be able to forget something in a conversation and someone will be like, I told you that, because it wasn't on your priority list. So your brain has done the filtering work for you. It's why if you're looking to buy a new red car, this is like one of the really popular examples, you will start to see that particular model, make, and color of car everywhere you go. And it's not that they weren't there before, it's just that they weren't important to you before. So the reticular activating system is another really key aspect of how we embed sustainability, how we start to shift things, and let's explore a little bit about how we can use that to our advantage. So again, we are in sustainability, we are trying to design long-term systems, sustainable outcomes, but inside short-term, pressure-driven environments. So this shows up with annual reports, with political terms we talked about, now with ASRS reporting in Australia, and an overarching sense of urgency that overrides that regulation, nervous system regulation. I just want to be specific because we also have legal regulations, right? So if we're just trying to get short-term relief and quick wins, there's going to be dysregulation. And unfortunately, when sustainability is an add-on, when we reward for urgency and short-termism, it's really hard to shift the needle to go into that longer-term planning and make meaningful outcomes beyond just what's required for reporting, for annual report, annual sustainability report, um, or certification or auditing and that kind of thing. Those become the urgent things, and they don't leave much bandwidth for doing more, for incorporating more of the team, for expanding beyond just what is urgent and now. And you can see it in how decisions are made under stress, how authority is distributed, and whether long-term commitments survive in this short-term environment. There might be great aspirations that, one thing I see is with some of the larger hotel groups, they've got fantastic initiatives, but when you go a little deeper, they'll be like, this property does this thing, and they have an organic regenerative garden. But then this other property, well, they've got solar panels and renewable energy. And then another property, they have farm to table. And another property, they've eliminated single-use plastics. But how do you get that working across the board when there's so many other competing priorities? And when difficult times emerge, of which we see so many, it seems like more, particularly in the tourism industry, what we're experiencing in the moment, early 2026, what we experienced in 2020 and 2021, when these times come up in fear, people go into preservation mode. There's contraction, there's pulling back. It shows up in budget cuts for marketing, for travel, for sustainability, for things that are not integrated. It is a focusing in, a narrowing of our vision. I may have talked about tunnel vision before. Like, it's a literal response. Our nervous system contracts and we focus on just what we have to do here and now. And when we're already operating in this way on the day-to-day, when something big happens, like what we're seeing at the moment with the political landscape, with the cost of petrol, with these kind of things, adding more stress to an already stressed out system, it's no wonder that we react, hunker down, and go into survival mode. And it's not to say that once we get this, once we start to see more regulated leaders, once we start to focus on the health and well-being of the humans in our workplace, that's not going to prevent these kind of situations from happening. There's still going to be ups and downs. There's still be times where we'll review and think, oh, we could have done this differently. However, from a regulated place, from a regulated nervous system, we can recognize these thoughts and know it's okay to take a minute to regroup, to make a measured response rather than a reactive one. Beautiful example of that is a hotel property in Cambodia that when COVID came along, and we saw this in a lot of places, right? Like hospitality and tourism, there was a huge, what did they call it? Furloughing? Like there were a huge amount of jobs lost. Like so many people lost their jobs during that time. And this particular hotel thought they were going to have to do the same thing. But here's what they did differently. They had a meeting, an open table with all of the staff. And it was actually the staff who said, well, what about if we came up with a plan that kept everybody employed at a lighter level? What about if whatever you were going to budget towards the staff you were going to keep, what about if we just shared that? So everybody had a little bit rather than a few people having their job and many other people not having their job. That's the kind of regulated leadership that leads to longer term sustainability. So that when things came back online, they weren't suddenly scrambling and trying to find staff again. They had their staff there. They just ramped things up in terms of people's hours and responsibilities again. They fared better overall by taking a measured response rather than a short reaction, quick reaction. And so if leadership sets the tone of an organization, if urgency and reactivity are rewarded at the top, then survival mode is cultural. And when it's the culture, it doesn't take much to tip it over the edge into full crisis mode. And so whilst nervous system regulation is an individual responsibility, it becomes sustainable once the system supports it. And again, speaking from my own experiences, having dived deeply into working on my own nervous system regulation, and then finding myself in situations where that's not supported, then I've left. I've left those situations. And so this also becomes a bigger conversation about staff well-being, retention, loyalty, so many things. If that's not supported, either the individual will fall back into dysregulation or more likely they will leave and find an environment where they are better supported. So looking at when sustainability is treated as an add-on, it's deemed more work, there's more friction, and it resorts to quick wins. This is also where we see greenwashing occur. Most greenwashing, in my opinion, most greenwashing is not malicious or intentional. A lot of it is because sustainability hasn't been systematized, hasn't been integrated. And so there's a disconnect between what marketing is saying and what operations are delivering. There's a disconnect between what's written in the client-facing correspondence and what housekeeping are told. It's the difference between a sustainable story on the outside, but procurement not being involved. This is the disconnect. I've also seen it through living in my two homes, my Southeast Asia home and my Australia home. When I was based in Cambodia, people from Western countries would often ask, how could I possibly be working on sustainability in such a poor country? The external perspective was that people in Cambodia were so poor and worried about where their next meal was coming from that how could they possibly take care of the environment? And this came up over and over again, and it still blows my mind a little bit. And that's definitely not the experience I had. And to be honest, for like the first 2 years that I was in Cambodia, as I was starting to explore, as I was starting to do workshops around single-use plastics, I was applying my beginner's mindset, and I said, what is the problem that is being faced here? What are the people like? What are the things that they're challenged with? I really wanted to add something of value and not something that I just thought was right. And when in this conversation we're having about nervous system regulation, I found that people in Cambodia are a lot more regulated. Actually, they were extremely open to learning about sustainability and environmental protection. And they were not living in survival mode, as was so often projected from the visitors from Australia and other Western countries. And it really spoke to me how much more dysregulated we are. Now that I'm back living in Australia, living in Sydney, a big, big city, there is a lot more dysregulation here. And so now we're facing this, how do we stay focused on sustainability when other parts of the world are going to shit? The answer is, again, nervous system regulation. What I found in Cambodia is that the pace is slower, yet everything still gets done. And in places like Sydney, the scarcity, the urgency, the go, 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 the hustle, the do more is just so prevalent. Wealth and regulation are not the same things. So with a narrow focus and survival metrics, our nervous system narrows our view. We go into that survival mode, we go into that tunnel vision, and what gets culled? The things that are add-ons. Sustainability is being treated as nice to have. And yet, we are all reliant on sustainability working if we're going to survive this. This is not about apocalyptic outcomes. This is about real things we're seeing. It's not just about war. Cost of living has been a topic of conversation for years now in Sydney. Our food systems, we live a very comfortable life here, and it's easy to complain that the cost of living is going up, the cost of petrol is crazy, and externalize that. But whilst we're operating unconsciously in those systems, we are supporting exactly those outcomes, and there's only going to be more. So what if we started to prioritize nervous system capacity? What could change? And I invite you to ask yourself this: if we were less reactive and more grounded and able to make long-term decisions, and if you can imagine a long-term future where resources are abundant, stress levels are lower, prices are affordable, or a continuation of what we've currently got, things getting tighter, more urgent. It might seem like we've just got to get through this period, but if we respond to that short-termism again, then this is going to perpetuate. This is going to carry on. So what if we could picture that long-term, beautiful future? What would it take to get there? What changes would we need to make? Some things I've thought of. What if leaders were measured more on staff turnover, on sustainability initiative continuity? Not just like, what's the new thing that you did, but like, how have you sustained this over time and improved it perhaps? What if there was evaluation on decision-making under pressure? There's going to be more situations where we're under pressure and needing to make decisions. So what if we trained for that? And what if burnout rates were tracked as a risk indicator? I am really, really keen to hear more opinions about what we could do, how we could do this in a stable, steady way to create a future that's better, rather than just accepting a fate of what seems to be coming for us. So if sustainability becomes integrated into the system, into how things are done, it actually becomes lighter. There's less friction because it's not sitting with just one person. It's not sitting as an add-on. When there's longer term thinking, then leadership regulation isn't selfish, it's actually strategic. So how do we start to change this? Like, we can change this in just small, really small moments. It doesn't need to be another big, huge obstacle. It can actually start quite small. So I recently saw a post from a director of one of my favorite NGOs in Cambodia, and she said they start their day with a meeting, the whole team, and some gardening, and then like a cup of tea, cup of coffee, and a chance to connect with each other. Like, wow. This is the kind of regulated leadership that really stands out to me. How does your day start? I remember many a company that I've worked in when I was back in my more corporate days. I distinctly remember more than one. It's funny how our nervous system takes us to similar scenarios, but often being told, there's like, why are you talking to your colleagues? There's no time for tea and a chat. You're here to work. Talk about reactive. So what I love now is that, using this example, what if we started our day slowly and intentionally with connection, nature, and that by doing that, we actually achieve more because we focus on what's necessary and important, not just on busy work, but on work that actually makes an impact. How would that feel? And if that seems like a really big stretch right now, that's okay. Because this whole system, this whole system has been winding up like this for so long. The odds are stacked against us when you think of how many brilliant people are working for the communication and social media platforms that keep us hooked on email dings and message dings and, oh, I've got to reply straight away. You know, they're very good at that. They're paid a lot of money and there's so many of them. So the odds are stacked in against us in this respect. But that doesn't mean that you're powerless to change it. It's situations like this that your job becomes protecting your peace, creating moments of peace, creating a pause, even if it's just 1 minute to take a deep breath and reset, even if it's 5 minutes to bring sustainability topics into existing meeting formats. When you can take 1 minute, take 5 minutes to pause, to regulate, even if it's just in that moment, then you're starting to create space and starting to create breathing room to see what your bigger term goals are, to see what you really want to achieve, to observe, not with judgment, but to observe. Is this important or is this a distraction? And in order to do this, we need systems that support long-term well-being, because willpower is not a strategy that helps us get where we want to go. But systems will get us there. Non-negotiables, creating space, becoming a person who takes a breath before they respond, becoming a person who says, I'm not going to reply to that message or email. I'm going to walk and make a cup of tea and think about it. Or I'm going to leave it overnight and come back to it tomorrow. Recently, I was listening to an interview with Brené Brown, and she talked about how a lot of people are needing a buffer between work and home, and that sometimes that looks like scrolling on social media. This is a numbing technique, and this is also a part of the survival mode that I've been talking about during this episode. But the thing is that more technology isn't going to help us detach from this survival pattern. More tech isn't going to solve us from more tech being the problem that got us here. And so what if instead we put the phone down and we walked around the block for 5 or 10 minutes? What if we talked about our colleagues, about what was really going on, what we're going through, without feeling like we just have to look busy? What if we talk to our families and partners about how we're feeling, so that it felt safe not to need such a big buffer between work and home? It really got me thinking. We're so on from the minute we wake up until the moment we go to sleep. What if we just started carving out those small moments where we could just be and not be holding on so tightly? We get out of our head, we connect with our fellow humans and nature, and most importantly, ourselves. This supports regulation. You might be thinking, I can't just do that. I can't just leave that. I can't go and live on a mountain like a hermit. I can't go on a family trip without taking my laptop. I can't go for a walk around the block without taking my phone. Some people go to the toilet and they take their phone. But what I want to say is, it doesn't have to keep going like that. And you have a massive opportunity to make your life better. Not by going to live on a mountain like a hermit, but by taking 5 minutes here and there. It's hard to go up against the system. The system is creating dysregulation in us. And then those of us, dysregulated people, are then creating and shaping the system. It's a feedback loop. And we can shift that by starting with awareness. This is the first step. It doesn't have to be the opposite extreme to make a difference. It can be small, incremental pockets of time without devices, creating moments of social connection. It starts with bringing things more into balance. And the same is true for sustainability. You don't need to go and hire more sustainability people. What if creating 5 minutes into regular meetings that you're already having, not siloing them into sustainability meetings, not offloading them into voluntary CSR teams, but bringing them into your regular operational meetings or strategic meetings? What if that's all it took? It's not about reinventing the wheel. It's about intentionally opening the door to provide a seat for sustainability at the table. It's about leveraging our reticular activating system so that sustainability starts to become more of a focus. Not a threat, but a focus through curiosity, through a beginner's mind. As an add-on, sustainability is fragile. It's the first thing to be cut under stress. As a 5-minute inclusion in an existing meeting, that's expansion. And it's much more approachable. There's less friction, less needing to have it all figured out, more curiosity, more engagement. When sustainability is protected from reactivity, integrity becomes operational, not just aspirational. That's powerful. People can feel the difference. That's where the risk of greenwashing disappears. What becomes possible internally is that people don't have to split themselves between what the company says and what it actually does. Leadership isn't about eliminating the pressure. It's about being able to hold the long term while managing the immediate. And sustainability is long-term design. So if our state shapes decisions, why are organizations relying on compliance to get this work done? I'll leave you there. Thank you for diving into nervous system regulation and reticular activating systems with me. Topics I love discussing and would happily discuss with you more. Thank you for listening to Two Homes. I'm your host, Sarah Rhodes, and I will see you next time.